The Mindset Advantage, a podcast by Arcadia Consulting, architects of change.
Crucial to our response to change is the need for self-care. Change is a journey of trials, challenges, and setbacks. It requires us to be at our strongest, mentally and physically. Today, Mark Albas is joined by Jane Smart to explain why leaders need to enable their colleagues to access the necessary physical and mental health support.
Hello, I'm Mark Albas. I'm a global partner of Arcadia Consulting, Architects of Change. I'm very passionate about our topic today, and I'll be hosting today's podcast on well-being and wellness. Joining me today is the ever-radiant Jane Smart. How are you, Jane?
Mark, thank you so much. I'm very well. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today and to talk about what a great topic, well-being and wellness.
Fantastic. Well, let's get to know you a little bit better. What do you do? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a consultant at Arcadia. After 20 plus years in a number of industry sectors, both here in the UK and overseas, I've had the privilege of spending the last 10 years with a mixture of coaching, facilitating, leadership development training, and as a consultant. In my home life, I'm married. I've got two sons, two stepsons, a gorgeous black lab who keeps me outside in the fresh air. I've also been a Bath rugby season ticket holder for many, many years, although any of you that probably follow the rugby might wonder why I'm still doing that on our current playing performances. But it's still a passion of mine. So, yeah, that's me.
Right. So you might be doing a little bit more of sticking to the dog walking rather than the rugby tickets going forward. We're talking today about well-being and wellness. It's a very hot topic. Many people are trying to incorporate it into their lives. Why does well-being and wellness matter?
Mark, such a great question. It matters so much. It's so greatly. But if I may just quickly look at those two different terms, just so that we understand. So wellness is very much about that physical wellness. We know that if we look after ourselves, if we eat well, if we do physical exercise, if we get good quality sleep, we feel well, that we have that wellness. And that gives us the energy to be able to perform in our day-to-day lives. It'll change over time for us. So I might not be able to run a marathon under 4 hours, but I might be able to walk a marathon distance at my age. So it's about that wellness. Are we able to function? Well-being is a bit broader. It encompasses more elements. So we might think about career well-being. Do we love what we do at work? We might think about financial well-being, how good we are about managing our finances, social well-being, having that close relationships, those meaningful friendships around us. We've talked about the physical well-being, our mental well-being, really important, community well-being, liking where you live, being part of that community. So the well-being piece is a broader piece, and that's really important for us as we talk about leadership, our role as leaders, and what we need to be doing as organizations. So if you think about somebody that might eat really healthily and do lots of physical exercise, but they have very few friends and they really dread going to work on a daily basis, that person's going to be struggling. So understanding their well-being, understanding what's going on for them, because that will ultimately affect their ability to perform. So to come back to your question, why does well-being and wellness matter? We can clearly see that if we have an employee that's struggling, it's impacting them as an individual, but it's also impacting the organisation and our ability to deliver what we need to deliver. Interestingly, Deloitte conducted research of over 18,000 millennials and Generation Z. So for those of us, it's anybody basically under 40. So of these 18,000, they found that 40 to 50% of those 18,000 had spent their time in a state of stress.
Wow.
50%.
It's an extraordinary high figure.
So and it's not just episodic. It's not just I've got a presentation to deliver or I've got a deadline that's coming. This is chronic stress. They're feeling like they're in that state all the time. So can you imagine the impact that has on them as individuals, but also for the organizations that they work for? Now, we know that more recently, stress has been rightly recognized as something which needs to take some time off, needs to be looked after, and is a reason to take time off work. But how many people are brave enough to say, I need to take time off work with stress?
Sure.
Again, that causes stress, doesn't it? It's it just compounds itself. So interestingly, there's an insurance company in the States, Colonial Life, who do a lot of research and look into this sector a lot. And they found that 20% of workers spend at least 5 hours a week focused on or thinking about their stresses and their worries and things that make them anxious. That's 5 hours every week lost in productivity because of those things that are causing them concern, causing them to be anxious.
5 hours a week just worrying about what they potentially are worrying about.
Absolutely.
Right.
So if you think about that, so if that's 20% of every workforce that's spending 5 hours of their work, imagine around the globe how many hours are lost. And it's not just about the productivity of the organisation; it's the individuals and their experience and what's going on for them. So it's a human problem and it's an organisational problem.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, haven't we?
But you can see why with stats like that, wellness and well-being is so important, and it's something that we really need to understand as leaders. What we need to be doing about it, how we can address it, because the human cost and the business costs are enormous. And when we saw with the pandemic, and having to go into lockdown very quickly, the changes that were impacted our well-being. So our day-to-day, the way we worked changed overnight. We weren't seeing our colleagues face-to-face anymore. We were now operating virtually. We were communicating differently. Some industries were really badly hit. People were losing their jobs. They were furloughed. And we weren't able to be outside exercising, all of those things that we want. Communities were impacted. So all of these are impacting the well-being that we were talking about, those factors that create our sense of well-being. And I'm sure all of the people listening to the podcast will have their own examples of stress which has come about, how their well-being has been impacted physically, mentally. But it's these stress-inducing situations are we need to get better at managing, recognising them and how we're going to be able to look after them and manage them. So it's critically important for individuals so that we let them flourish, we let them be able to deliver and to thrive. But that's our role as leaders, yeah? So to answer your question, it's massively important both for the individuals but also for the businesses. And as leaders, it rests with us to do the right thing.
Right. So some really interesting and startling figures and research there. And you just mentioned in your last statement that it's really important for leaders. How do leaders and organizations make a difference? How do they support people in this situation? How do they really contribute to wellness and well-being?
Well, I'm kind of hoping that organizations in a business as usual state will already have some really great things in place for their staff's well-being, for their health and for their physical and mental well-being. So if we think about things like health insurance, we might have access to gymnasiums, the cafeteria may have some really delicious healthy food on offer, there might be lots of events, lots of information to promote healthy well-being awareness, that awareness of when we might be feeling stress. So I'm hoping that within an everyday organisation that is worth its salt, these things will already exist. They will be just part of the support that one would have. And it's important to attract talent. We look for these things when we're looking to move roles. What does the organisation provide around those things? I know that a lovely example of a client that we work with, they offer a doctor. So a doctor comes once a month to the organisation, and you can just book your time and go and spend some time with them. And it's been hugely well received, just because it's an opportunity to go and sit and chat and discuss physical or mental concerns that we might have. And the organisation has seen a really, really strong positive response to that seemingly small intervention that they're offering. So business as usual things we hope were already in place. For leaders, it's different. It's slightly different because there's a responsibility to be over and above that, and especially during change, this is really important. Leaders need to be leading by example. They need to role model the expectations. So that's about being willing to share their own journeys, their own stories. If we're feeling a bit vulnerable, being open to say so. If we're struggling, say so. And that just means that it's easier for other people to feel that they're able to share what might be going on for them. So leaders will be able to also understand or look out for people in their team that might be feeling burned out, feeling that their stress levels are getting a bit too high. They'll recognise traits and behaviours in their staff because they know them well, which will indicate for them that they are beginning to feel less well in themselves. We talk about leaders creating wellness action plans, let's call them like that. So basically having a system that they can use to look after and identify the health, the mental and the physical well-being of their teams. And it's making it become a language that is just part of every day, making it the norm, making it something that we're happy to share and talk about. And that's why that leading by example is really important. Taking ownership of the practical steps that we can take to identify our triggers and to therefore do something about them. One of the really interesting ones that's come along is for a leader to be able to show how to create a strong work-life balance. We know when we first went into lockdown, people who were working from home really struggled to turn off work or to just leave one room and go into the other and switch roles. And as we're coming out of the pandemic and just going forward, we need to be really mindful of leading by example in how we create that strong work-life balance. There's been some super examples, and Mark, I know you will have seen them in the work that you do, of the flexibility that people have been given. People are able to work around the other commitments that they have. More of that, leading by example, and more of that going forward. And it's interesting because the pandemic really required leaders to dial up that ability to show that they care. They really care. They listen when they ask you how you are. They really listen to the answers and they recognise when it's not working. And this is really important for successful leaders going forward, having that mindset. So we know that if we're going through a period of change, whatever that might be, at the beginning, in those initial stages when we're receiving the change information and there's immediate and a short-term change response, that's when this wellness and well-being piece is the most important. And that's where leaders need to really, really understand that and embrace it and spend that time, almost suspend, if you like, this drive to get these changes in place, but to just make sure that the team are feeling cared for, they're feeling supported, and that they're able to go on that journey with them. So really important. And it's a great time to also create some of the team activities that we might see. And there's been lots of great examples that we've heard of.
Share some with us, that'd be fantastic.
Well, you may have already participated in the Arcadia cook-alongs that we did. So we did bi-weekly cook-alongs where we would all come together with our ingredients and spend half an hour making something wonderful. One of our other clients had a lovely idea. What they did is they gave everybody a small budget to take away and invest in something that would be a hobby, something they wanted to learn, something they wanted to try. And the idea being that it would be somewhere for them to channel their creativity or whatever they want to do, and then come back and share that with the team. So we heard about candle making and drawing and guitar lessons and French and all sorts of wonderful things. And then they would come back and share how they were getting on. And I'm not sure if there were any guitar recitals in there, but some fun, just some nice things to do to create that team bonding and to have an outlet from the just to keep our stress levels down a bit. So as leaders, spending longer on personal check-ins, really listening to what's going on, drilling down, asking great questions. So organisation has responsibility, but us as leaders, it's those practical actions that you take, and leading by example are the most important, I would surmise.
Nice. You were talking about teams there. Why is remote team building important?
I think we recognise that being with people, having that sense of camaraderie, having that sense of shared ownership of something really helps us to perform, and we're able to, that trust is in place. We can have those robust conversations that we need to get things done. And so while we're not having face-to-face conversations, while we're not able to to have that banter that we might have in between, have those coffees, have those beers together. It's really important that we try and recreate that in a different way. So whether it's the cook-alongs, we did some lovely one-to-one walks. So we would organise to have a call with colleagues, and just not necessarily colleagues that we would work with on a day-to-day basis, and just get to know each other. And as we're walking, have that call. We call them walks and talks. And one of our colleagues said, "It's not a roam and moan," which is rather wonderful. But so it's just about building those relationships, getting some depth in there, getting to know each other. And it will be part of how we work going forward. As we know, we recognise this hybrid working style will be with us going forward. So really important as well for leaders to be able to create that team bond regardless of where their individuals are.
So we talked about how organizations and then leaders can really make a difference to well-being and to wellness. I noticed in your language you used the word during change, and the word change came up quite a lot. Why do you think it matters even more so in change than during normal states of being?
Great question. And I think it's because during states of change, there is a level of anxiety which might show up. There's that unknown, new situations. Our brain doesn't quite know what's coming. So we naturally have a bit of a stress reaction to it, particularly in the early parts, while there's still a lot that hasn't been shared, or that gaps that we need to fill. And we can find that physically, we find it quite overwhelming. It can be quite exhausting. It sets off our sympathetic nervous system. So those cortisol levels rise, those stress levels rise within us whilst we're waiting to find out what's going to happen. So if we've already got that pre-existing stress that we talked about, our Deloitte millennials, we've already got those levels of 40 or 50% of ongoing stress, bringing change on top of that will just add to that. And so that's why the wellness and wellbeing piece is so important, because if you imagine we're now operating at 50 or 60% levels of stress, that's just not sustainable. It's really, it's having a negative impact on the individual, and it's certainly having a negative impact on the organization. If somebody's operating with that much level of anxiety, they are not going to be focused on making sure they deliver your change plan for you. They just don't have the capacity to do so. So it's very much about the managing those levels of stress. And as a leader, that's one of the things that you can do to really make a positive impact. And as I think I mentioned, it's at the beginning of these change journeys when the wellness and wellbeing piece is the piece that we need to manage. Because if we can get our teams into a state where they have that positive mindset, they know that they can deliver this, then actually the rest becomes much easier.
Great. Anything else that leaders should be doing to support during change as it relates to wellness and well-being? Any general tips that you would have?
Goodness me, there's a long list, I'm sure. And I'll just share a few things. Most of them have come from working with our clients, sharing with them what's worked for them, and just getting them to really dial up that emotional intelligence. What would you want? How would it work well for you? We've got much better at listening to the emotional language. So because our mental well-being has been much more spoken about recently, it's been something that people are embracing much better and are much more aware of and willing to talk about. That's become a language that we use on a day-to-day basis within the organizations. And that's really important, acknowledging when people are struggling. And we have a language for it, and we have a much more confident way to approach it. We're delighted that finally we've always had a physical first aider training course. Now we have a mental health first aider training course. So, just that language and the ability to stop and to listen and to ask questions. We've talked about role modeling, particularly your work-life balance. I mean, we've seen some lovely videos, haven't we, that where, people are on calls and the children run through, or the dog starts barking, and actually it makes us more human. I think there's been a positive from that, where we just get to know people as in their personal lives as well. That we talked about developing the action plans. Look out for our triggers, support each other, know what's coming. Just the basics, Mark, let's go, encourage people to walk outside, encourage people to take breaks. Do not encourage people to be working over weekends to try and get things done. We've heard about organisations where we might have exercise challenges. Can we walk or run 100 kilometers in a month, or those sorts of things. So lots of ways to create positive vibes, positive activities. And again, they bring the team together, but they're also helping with our wellness and our well-being. Lots of organizations now are encouraging mindfulness sessions. They're providing Zoom yoga classes. There's just an enormous raft of things. But it's down to you as the leader to find out what the team wants, what will work, what will land really well for them, and creating the environment where it's encouraged and it's the route that we would want people to take. One of the other lovely things which we've seen is creating buddy systems. So we might have quite a big team, putting groups of 2 or 3 people together just to look after each other, to get to know each other better, doing that for 3 to 4 months, and then changing to different groups. It helps build that trust, help build that rapport. So there's so many things, and I'm sure that you've got a raft of them as well up your sleeve, and those listening to the podcast will also have some wonderful examples. But I think it's the message is very much in our mindset. We know that we can deal with these things, and if we're mentally and physically ready, then we can achieve all sorts of wonderful things.
Some great tips and advice there. I'm going to ask us to go personal just for a moment. And I think, reflecting what you said, I was probably one of those statistics that when I was a junior lawyer in an old career, the amount of stress and overthinking, I had to take a break. And I went after a few years and took 6 months and went to India and discovered a meditation technique. I think it probably all sounds very cliche, but it saved my life in many ways. And I continue to meditate every day as a way of me filling up my cup that allows me to go into the world after that with a bit more ease and grace. Anything that you do personally as part of your routine that you could share with our audience?
Oh, happily, Mark. I walk. I mentioned at the beginning I have a great big black Labrador who loves to be outside. But for me, it's walking. I'm fortunate enough to live in a beautiful part of the country. I can walk from my house, and it's the place to go and just to think, to reflect. I might listen to podcasts. I might spend time doing my one-to-one walk and talk, but that's my time and my space where I can reflect. It was running, it was high-intensity sport, but now it's walking. And it's the overall benefit is just, a real pleasure for me. Thank you.
Fantastic. The Romans, the ancient Romans used to have a saying that walking fixes everything. So it sounds like you're a convert, Jane. Well, thank you for listening and joining the Mindset Advantage podcast series. We look forward to the next one. If you have enjoyed what you've heard, check out one of our other episodes. Until next time, good day, good morning, or good night.
You've been listening to The Mindset Advantage. Follow Arcadia Consulting on social media platforms to stay updated.